Okay, so we will start with our district governor-elect, and as you can see, his full bio is on the screen there for your convenience, as well as his lovely headshot. DGE Brian, and it's also in French. DGE Brian joined Rotary through the Rotary Club of St. Vincent in 1988, and he served as president during the Rotary year of 1993-1994. He served as assistant governor on 9 occasions, which I think has to be some sort of record. We'll check into that. And as you can see, he's a member of the Paul Harris Society. He's very proud of the fact that he's attended several district as well as international conferences and conventions. We see that he's a chartered accountant, and his parting message to us is he encourages the district to offer hope to those with mental health challenges, and he is encouraging each club in the district to identify a project to promote improved mental health services and the delivery of mental health support. This will be shared with you as well, so you can have it at your convenience. But this is, in a nutshell, the introduction of our incoming district governor, Brian Glasgow. And here it is in French for our French viewership. Now, Brian will be helped by an entire district team, but his right hand will be his district secretary, and this will be the person of Annette Mark. And we see here that Annette is a member of the Rotary Club of St. Vincent, and she served on the board of directors for the past 3 years, with her presidency being in the Rotary year 2020 to 2021. During her tenure as president, unfortunately, her club had to take action during the volcano eruption in St. Vincent, but as we can see, they were pivotal in the establishment of a warehouse to collect donations, as well as coordinate distributions of those items to those affected by the disaster. And we see she's had an exciting career as an attorney, while she's worked in the private and public sector, with her most recent appointment being as executive director of Invest St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And here is it in French as well. So that's our district secretary-elect, Annette Mark. I now call on Everistus to do the next set of introductions. We move into the introduction of our district training team. AB, as we call him affectionately, and as you can see, he is a member of the Rotary Club of Chaguanas from 2006. His classification, he's a certified quality engineer, and he's the managing director of his company, Suriqual Services Limited. We asked each member of the district's training committee this year, what were they most looking forward to serving on the district committee? And this is their district training committee service statement. AB says, I believe that my Rotary experience as president twice, secretary also twice, and director multiple times, assistant governor for the past 16 years has positioned me to understand the challenges faced by members and their clubs. Thus, serving on the DTC will enable me to offer suggestions, guidance, and resources to aid in the development of members and clubs, and by extension, District 7030. Next, we have the great Evangeline Allen out of the Rotary Club of Antigua. You can see she joined Rotary in 2008. Her classification is retired banker in the credit division, lucky on the retired emphasis there. Her district training committee service statement, I am looking forward to sharing and interacting with the elects while at the same time learning from others. Okay, we'll now invite AB to introduce the next set of DTT members.
All right, good afternoon all. It's my pleasure to introduce a member of the training team. Everestus Jean-Marie is from the club, who's from the Rotary Club of Rotary Satellite Club of St. Lucia Sunset, uh, being a member since 2018, and his classification is management consultancy, specializing in customer service. And his statement of being part of the team is that he's looking forward to developing his knowledge and growth about the district and organization, as well as finding more ways to contribute to our progress.
Okay, the next person that I will be introducing is Lisa Foster. And Lisa joined Rotary Club of Garden City, Georgetown in 2008. Her classification is Senior Coordinator Project Delivery and Monitoring of Conservation International Guyana. And her district statement is to encourage others to recognize and understand that accepting or volunteering in leadership roles can be a fun experience and is nothing to shy away from, thereby increasing the number of Rotarians that take on leadership positions within the organization.
Next, we have Malcolm M. Hurley, who is from the Rotary Club of Barbados since 2011, and his classification is a certified security consultant. And his service statement says he wants to serve, learn more about Rotary, and help others in the district as learn as well. And then we have Cuthbert, or better known as Cossie Woods. He's from the Rotary Club of Liamagua, St. Kitts, since 2011, being a member. His classification is International Development Professional, affiliated with the UN, I suppose. And his service statement says he's eager to work with a diverse and dynamic team of committed Rotarians in order to support the district governor and facilitate activities for capacity building for district and club leaders.
The next person is, Makonem Hurley, and he joined Rotary Club of Barbados in 2011. His classification.
Down already.
We're on Jaffrick.
Mhm.
Is McConem on your screen or Jaffrick?
Jaffrick.
Okay, Banji, yes, Jaffrick.
Sorry. No, that's not.
Jaffrick is on the screen.
I'm not seeing that. He comes after or before. Okay, Jaffrick Reiner, and he joined the Rotary Club of St. Kitts in 2023 this year. His classification is Information Technology Specialist. His district training service statement is to gain a better understanding of what it takes to serve, and in turn, impart the same service ethic to others in the district.
Banji, you see in the screen moved to Alvina?
Alvina. So Alvina Rambaran, I hope I pronounce it correctly, Rambaran. And she joined the Rotary Club of Garden City, Georgetown, and the date isn't there, but her classification is Agriculture/Finance Chief Administrative Officer. And her statement is she's looking forward to working with the district training team as we share Rotary knowledge while also increasing/gaining her own knowledge. I continue? Then we have Ryan Danglaben, and he's a Rotaract from the Rotaract Club of Piaco. He's a student, of course, and his statement is, I am looking forward to learning new things and working with the committee to accomplish all that needs to be done. AB.
Right, next we have Sarah Mohan, and she's from the Rotary Club of Starbrook. Her classification is Technical and Finance Officer. And her DTC service statement says she wants to adopt and introduce new techniques to assist in the effective execution of club administration and projects within Rotary and Rotary clubs.
And last but not least.
So we
Jeffrey
have,
John.
yes. So we have Miss Leah Craig Chatterton, Rotary Club of St. Kitts since 2011, classification, legal and international trade policy services, and her DTC service statement, looking forward to continuing the creation and facilitation of learning opportunities for Rotary and Rotaract Club members, thus enabling them and myself to better understand this wonderful organization that is Rotary International.
Okay, so there you have it. The introduction of our district governor-elect, our district secretary-elect, as well as our district training team for the year 2023-2024. Please give them all a round of applause. Fantastic. We will now go into the introduction of our first presenter, past Assistant Governor Tafida Stewart.
Good afternoon, fellow Rotarians. It is my pleasure to introduce our first presenter for the evening, PAG Tafida Stewart. She joined the Rotary family as a Rotaractor in Grenada, later transitioned to the Rotary Club in St. Kitts. I would not try to pronounce the name, where she has been for the last 12 years. She has served as club president and sponsored the Rotaract Club in the island of Nevis. She has also served as assistant governor for 3 years and is a Paul Harris fellow and is a certified accountant by training and a CFO by profession. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. It is my pleasure to be here this afternoon with my fellow Rotarians to share with you some of the best practices for budgeting. Okay, so what exactly is budgeting? Can everybody see my screen very well? All right, so budgeting is really, simply put, is a process of creating a budget. And one may wonder, what is a budget? A budget is basically a plan that details your revenue or your earnings, your expenses, and the profit or loss as a result of the spending. Now, usually it is prepared for a club or organization. It is prepared annually before the financial year starts, and it's also prepared at the commencement of a budget. Of a project. Now, I like to equate the budget to the 4-way test. And I'm going to tell you why. Because the 4-way test is an ethical guide, and it's basically applicable in every aspect of our lives, in our personal lives, in our business lives, and of course, in our Rotary lives. And similarly, a budget is a financial guide that applies in our personal lives, Rotary lives, and our business life. So that is how I like to equate it to. It is basically a financial guide. Now, what are some of the best practices when doing budgeting? First and foremost, we need to have a treasurer. And Rotary being what it is, we have various different professionals, persons with different backgrounds within our clubs, so we can tap into our expertise. So let's get someone who has a financial accounting background, somebody who is passionate about planning, financial planning, and have that person serve as a treasurer, because that person is responsible for leading the process of budgeting and also managing the budget going forward. So critically, we must have a treasurer and someone that's committed to the task. Then we need to set realistic objectives. Now, every club has a strategic plan, and that is the guidance that was passed down from RI. We need to have a strategic plan for our club. It spans 3 to 5 years, as the case may be, and we have to periodically review those plans. But from that plan, we determine what we're going to do in a particular Rotary year. And as such, that allows us to set objectives. So for our budget to work, we need to set realistic objectives that is based on the plan that we have for that particular year. And of course, it has to align with our strategic plan for the club. Now, we also need to make realistic assumptions. So from the objectives that we set, we need to make assumptions as to how we're going to achieve those objectives, and we attach revenue and costs towards it. So how do we make those realistic assumptions? We look at what happened in prior years and glean from that. So we take our revenues, and we know what we're going to look into what some of them are shortly. But for instance, we have membership dues, one of our biggest area under the club account, membership dues. Now, if our plan is to increase members by 5, then we know how much our dues is expected to increase by. If we would have engaged some of our sponsors, our regular partners, and they would have given commitments that we have a certain funding available, then we can make realistic assumptions there. So it's basically looking at what happened in the past, looking at what's about to happen, taking into consideration the economic impact, looking at what has changed in terms of cost of living, etc., and making realistic assumptions. And to make those assumptions as well, we need to engage our committee heads. We have persons in charge of fundraising, persons in charge of executing community projects. We need to get those persons involved. So as part of the objectives, we need to know the plan that they have in place to achieve those objectives and the revenue that would be derived and the expenses that would be expended to achieve those objectives. So we need to get basically the board involved in the whole planning process. And if necessary, we can get the club involved as well, because every committee head has members of the club that is involved in that committee. So we can get everybody involved in coming up with those realistic assumptions, because we're looking to project what is going to happen in the next Rotary year. And critical also, we need to have a reserve fund. We need to put some monies aside should there be any form of catastrophe or emergency, something that pops up, and we have to dig into that reserve fund. So we need to put some funds aside. And of course, let's use the technology. We have various new free software online. We can download one. Excel is always available, and it's very useful. So we need to utilize the technology. So those are some of the best practices in terms of preparing a budget, budgeting. So let's just take a quick look at some of what a budget is going to look like. And it typically looks like your everyday income statement of profit and loss for the club. So for example, if we look at the club account, and we know we're supposed to separate our activities, report for it differently, and have separate bank accounts for our club or operating account and for our charity account. So we're looking here at our club account, which is basically the management of the club. And we see here for the upcoming financial year, this is just a sample. So we have membership dues, merchandise sales, fellowship, fines, etc. So we would have looked at what happened in the past, look at our membership, decide if it's going to grow or not, look at the expenses that we incur in terms of the meeting places, guest speakers, and so on. And we can project what we expect to earn and expense in a particular period. And we represent it in a budget, which of course has to be approved. And we'll go through that process shortly. Similarly, for a project, the community side, for projects, we need to establish budgets. So this is looking at a fundraising project at the moment. Again, we look at what happened in the past. If this is a project that you usually do. We look at ticket sales we've had in the past, sponsorship commitments that we would have gotten. And it's advisable for clubs that have partnerships in the business community to engage them before the year ends to get commitments for sponsorships and partnerships and so on. So that helps your budget preparation to be realistic. Similarly, for expenses, you take a look at what is happening, what you plan to achieve, and you factor this into your budget. So this is basically a simple budget for a fundraising project. Now, once the budget is established, it has to go through the budget approval process. And we know our financial year is July 1st to June. So we expect by May, the incoming board would have had its budget prepared already. We also know that it should be approved, even if it's not approved before the board is installed, by the first month in July, it should be approved. And then every committee chair has knowledge as to what they're working with. Each committee has its budget. And of course, it is shared with the club. Now, preparing a budget and just having it sitting there, it's not going to be of any use to the club. So we need to do variance analysis when the budget is prepared and the activities are taking place. And that is what we consider management of the budget. And as I said previously, the treasurer takes the lead here. So on a monthly basis, you would record the activities of the club. And again, as mentioned before, we need to separate the activities of the operating account and the charity account. So the activities are recorded on a monthly basis, and it is compared to the budget that we set for that particular period. And when the budget is set, we can break it down by month, so you can have a running indication as to what is happening with the club. Then you subtract actual from budgeted, and you get an indication as to how we're doing. In this simple presentation we have here, the club seems to be meeting all its budgeted targets. Now, this can be a good thing and a bad thing, and let me tell you why. Good thing in the sense that the club would have set its targets, and the members of the relevant committee, in this case, membership, would have made some effort to surpass what was budgeting. So it looks here as if they would have recruited additional members, so the membership dues would have gone up and admission fees gone up. It could be a situation too where the budget was just done without considering the activities of the membership committee. So that is why it's very important that realistic objectives are set. Similarly, the same happens with expenses. You look at the expenses month and month, and you compare it to what is detailed in the budget, and you examine to see what decisions the club needs to take in terms of reducing expenses or increasing revenue so that the club is sustainable.
PAG Tafida, before you continue, would it be possible for you to put it in presenter view? Persons are making that request just so they can see the presentation a bit better.
Certainly. Is this better? Not so much?
No, but put it on slideshow then. Not
This is a lot better than it was.
Oh,
It is
okay.
it is on slideshow at the moment.
Okay. Okay, great. Then let's work with this then.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. I know it is not an interactive session, but if anybody has a question, I guess they can pop it into a comments box somewhere. Is there one into the chat? If there are any questions, I'm trying to stick within the 20 minutes. Okay. Why shall we present, or what are the benefits to doing budgets? And as indicated previously, it really helps with your money management skill for the club, for your business organization, for your personal life. We don't have unlimited financial resources, and so we have to plan. We have to create a budget as to how we're going to spend the income that we receive. And as indicated previously, it helps us to achieve the objectives within the club. It also facilitates decision-making, because in looking at the various variance analysis and so on, the club can decide what action it needs to take to achieve its objectives. And of course, it prevents failure. There is a saying which goes by Benjamin Franklin: if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So budgeting is very critical for the club and for any organization, and also in your personal life. Now, there are limitations to budgeting. The budget is only as good as the data you use in the budgeting. And as indicated previously, it is very critical that we know the plan of the club for the entire year. We set realistic objectives and we make assumption that is realistic as well. So it's as the budget is as good as the data that is used in it. We know that it takes time to complete and to manage, and that can be a limitation to clubs doing budgets. But it's very critical for us to get the right person that has a passion for financial planning to assist the club in preparing its budget and managing its budget. And a budget is not set in stone. Like any plan, it has to change with the environment, changes in the environment, changes in circumstances. So it is something that has to be adjusted from time to time. You will set the budget for a year, then there'll be some unexpected occurrences within the club, within the environment, and the board would have to go back to the budget and make adjustments to it and reapprove it. And some persons, I wouldn't say that that is a limitation of a budget per se, in terms of inflexibility in decision making. I would say that's more so of the persons managing the budget. Persons tend to have the tendency that says, the budget says that we need to spend X amount, and us as such, we're not budgeting, even though there's a very good case that is made for that expenditure or for that project to be undertaken. So sometimes the persons managing the budget can be a little bit inflexible and render the budget useless. So basically, in short, those are just some of the best practices for budgeting. It is a critical exercise that every club really needs to undertake. If you don't plan, the club is likely to fail. You do not know how the club is performing. You're just spending crazy. You're not raising adequate revenue. And so the club is likely to fail. So in short, those are some of the best practicing for budgeting within a Rotary Club.
Thank you so much, Past Assistant Governor Tafida. You really came in under time, definitely under 20 minutes. I'm not good with math, but you started around 6:25, 6:26. So extremely well put together, concise presentation.
That being the case, I suppose we can take questions that persons may have, because my preference would have been to have our interactive working sessions to do with budget. So if you don't mind.
Yes,
DP.
we can have 10 minutes of question and answers up to 6:50.
Or any comments, or persons may have a suggestion or something that they want to include as a best practice for budgeting.
Peter Pompey, the Rotary Club of Georgetown Central, President-elect. When I started my Rotary experience about 8 years ago, the strict requirements as was taught was to ensure that project funds are only used for projects. At the time, our club did not make provisions for administrative expenses that will occur in the execution of a project. It was only recently that type of acceptability or of acceptance has become more appreciated or appreciable, in the sense that we are now putting a small, maybe 5 to 7% of the total cost or expense of the project to, let's say, administrative expense for that specific project. Is that against the requirements of Rotary to do? Or that is something that should be decided by the club?
I think, strictly speaking, it is not something that we're supposed to do. However, and that is basically my opinion, I think some consideration can be given to a small percentage of the funds going towards administration of the club. Rotary International itself, I think, well, I would just leave that point. I see.
Okay, if I may come in here, Brian Glasgow. One of the very strict requirements of Rotary is that we segregate administration expenses from charitable expenses. In other words, we have to make sure that none of the money that we collect from the public is spent on ourselves. And that is a very strict requirement. Now, some clubs like to wander into the gray areas. And as far as we're concerned, in 70-30, there should be no gray areas. It's black and it's white. You raise money from Rotarians to manage your club. You raise money from the public, and the money you raise from the public must never be spent on managing the clubs. And in the budgeting process, that has to be recognized in the budgeting process. It has to be recognized in the financial statements as well. The financial statements that clubs produce at the end of the year should have two components: club activities and project activities. And if at any time, any money that is raised from the public, ostensibly for charitable purposes, finds its way into club funds, then they're doing something seriously wrong. It's not permitted. So yeah, thanks, Leah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
We also have a question in the chat. What's the best advice for a club to effectively plan a budget where the previous year would have experienced a fail in budget?
Well, we need to look at what resulted in the failed budget the previous year. So we'll have to do some investigation into what transpired, identify the issues and the challenges and do not let it recur in your preparation of the current budget.
Any other questions or comments?
I have a comment. In the Rotary Club of Antigua, about 2 years ago, that very same question was asked about the administrative costs, because I think it's a practice to take out 10%. And what was told to the club is, when you are preparing your budget, make sure you include it as an administrative cost and not really as a part of the profit. So I think it can be considered. That is when you're executing a project, a fundraiser, make sure you make provision for 10% of the profit or the surplus. I think that can work. It will work that way.
Vanji, can you specify or elaborate on what you mean by the 10% administrative costs, and what kinds of costs would fall under that?
Okay, based in terms of administrative, your time. Time is very important. And in your budget, of course, you're going to budget for the amount of surplus or the amount of profit. Exactly. If you intend to make 80,000, then you make provision for administrative costs of 8,000. But most times it is for the time served executing the project. Because in Antigua, there is this huge project, Colors Fete, and it takes about 4 months, and it takes everything, every bit of energy out of you. And so that particular year, our DG did not have a problem with us taking or making provision for the 10%. And also at the RI level, I can recall last year that for the Rotary Foundation, I can be guided by PDG Wadi, but 10, I think, is it 10 or 20? A percentage is taken out at the RI level, and it is also for administrative costs. Again, I can be guided by PDG Wadi.
PDG Wadi does have his hand up. I think though the administrative costs are as it relates to the particular project, not for club administration. So any expenses as it relates to the project, that's the administration of the project. Like if you need to bring on a project manager or a secretary or an accountant to keep those funds, or if you need to hire a firm to do the audit, that sort of stuff, from my understanding, is acceptable. But PDG Wadi has his hand up, so I'll let him come on now.
Thank you, Leah. I think that we should make let's say, we have to separate projects and let's say the club administration. I think that especially DGE Brian has said it, I think very openly and clearly, that yes, for a project, you can have administrative costs, and of course, you should take that out of the budget, out of the income. That's one thing. But for the club, the operations of the club, yes, the income for that should come from the Rotarians themselves, not public funds.
Okay, thank you for that, PDG Wadi. I see a message in the chat from PDG Elwin. Would you like a minute to expound as well, or is everything clear as has been stated?
Thank you, Leah. I will be turning my camera off because I'm in the dark. We are experiencing a blackout here. But I totally agree with DGE Brian and PDG Wadi. For as far as the Antigua Club from Evangeline, First of all, you're being member of a Rotary Club, which means that you're offering your time to execute community projects. So while Tafida Stewart was talking about budgeting, we also have to bear in mind that we have to make some planning from the Rotary members. And I cannot imagine that it will take some time to compensate your time to put in a community project as a Rotarian, as a service club, as a members club. So that is not what we have experienced in the past. I do agree with DJ Brian and PDG Wadi. So consider that carefully when you're executing projects, which part of the budget you're making some reservation or taking out as administration costs.
So how do we address the clubs who have the practice of taking away a portion of the fundraising and attaching it to their club accounts? How do we deal with those clubs?
That's an excellent question. And I think the best time for that ventilation would be on Thursday, since we are now at 6:51 and we have our second presenter online waiting to make our presentation. And it is about service projects, community needs assessments. So please, PAG Tafida, can you document that question in the chat so we can have it to start out with at Thursday's session? We'll now invite Rotarian Cosbert to introduce our next speaker, our next presenter.
Hi, good evening. Yes, so I have the pleasure of introducing our next speaker, PDG Roger Bose. Roger celebrated 30 years as a Rotarian in January of this year, and he has been president of the Rotary Club of San Fernando on 3 occasions and an assistant governor for 2 years. Roger has been the coordinator of Zone 33-34, which it has 100,000 meal packaging events at both the Norfolk, Virginia, and Atlanta, Georgia summits, as well as assistant chair for district governor-elect training. He serves as District 7030 governor for the year 2016 to 2017. Currently, he is a CEO of Caribel, a family-owned telecommunication business in San Fernando, Trinidad, and serves on multiple boards as chairman and special advisor or director. So PDG Roger, we invite you to take the floor now.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and good evening to everybody on the call. Good evening, DG Leslie, DG Brian, and your team. I'm very happy to have been invited to make this presentation because I think that as incoming officers of our clubs, and indeed as Rotarians for some time, most of us in our various clubs, we often have, as we just started to have a little while ago, a discussion that that you find that you can get very different opinions about, almost on sometimes on both sides of the spectrum. You will hear something happen or be spoken about in our very own district that seems odd and sometimes appears to show that we are disjointed. And I bring that up because I feel that being part of the same family means that we should have a shared vision with regard to certainly one of the major mandates of being a Rotarian in our Rotary clubs, and that is carrying out service projects. So I don't think there will be any dispute from anybody on this call about carrying out service projects being one of our major mandates. As incoming officers, it's a very important discussion to have with regard to how you will lead your club with particular regard to carrying out community service projects. Often, and I suppose as a past governor as well, I have the experience of having visited clubs or speaking to other Rotarians from other clubs who is the way that they deal with the business of the club depends on how many and the type of requests that come into the club. meaning that I guess we're all very familiar with the fact that people would come to or organizations or people in need would come to us asking for help in various ways. Sometimes they come to us for things like wheelchairs or specialized beds for people with medical problems. They ask for money for various things. They ask for money sometimes also for operations or various other medical things, medical ailments that they need help with money for. And we get requests going from people whose houses have moved down, or people who are very low income level needing help just to get by. We all face these kind of requests coming into our clubs on a very regular basis. But what we probably do not do, or we don't do often enough, is be proactive as incoming officers, which we can, at the moment that we are speaking, do now, and be proactive about having a plan separate to simply responding to requests that come into our club, and having a plan that really puts or gives the attention of your immediate community to all the members in your club. What I mean by that is, we've always been, well, I guess in the past, rather, we have had clubs divided by, or appeared to be divided by, geographic regions. And for some of the smaller islands, for example, the main club may have been in the main town. The second club may have come on the other side of the island, for example. And there's, I guess over time there was that impression that the club from the main town, their community, so to speak, was in that area, and the club on the other side of the island sort of adopted, geographically speaking, community needs in that area. So apart from the fact that I think that kind of geographic changes, division with clubs does not really exist anymore. It still means that we should have some kind of plan about addressing needs of our immediate community. I mean, not just to show care and concern, but I think to be more proactive as a club rather than sitting and waiting for somebody to ask us for something. So the main point I want to start with is that we should be thinking, how can we address problems in our immediate community as a standard project going forward for my incoming term as a president. I'm going to share my screen now, and my presentation is about community needs and assessment. So as an introduction, you can all read this for yourself, of course, but assessments are the foundation of every humanitarian project because they provide a framework to identifying solutions to a community's problems. And the reason for that opening statement as well, and what I try to give you as a preamble to that, is I believe that as responsible clubs, we should be doing something that is very specific and very focused with respect to how we could help our community in a very tangible way during the next Rotary year. And I'm going to say, not just by being good responders to requests that may come in, but by proactively and systematically, which we will go through shortly, carry out a process of identifying the needs of our community or a community that you may choose in order to carry out or design and carry out specific projects that address the needs of this community. Now, before I go into types of assessments, I want to draw an example of what my club did approximately 3 years ago, which I will admit to everybody was the last time we genuinely went down this exact path that I'm about to explain to everybody, meaning that we consciously decided that we were going to look for a community. It didn't happen to be San Fernando, which is considered the second largest town or city, rather, now city status in Trinidad. So we looked for a community that was somewhat out of the city and more in the countryside that clearly needed specific help. And so we went and found a community that was having more than one actually serious problem. And we sort of adopted that community in a very systematic way, with, like I said, I'm about to go through, by identifying, communicating and identifying what their needs were. And then, to jump the gun a little bit, what we did was we built projects around satisfying as many of their needs as possible. So the different types of assessments that we can use in order to identify their needs include community meetings, asset inventories, surveys, interviews, focus group, community mapping, which I will go through now to explain what each one means. Now, with respect to community meeting, tips, these are some tips for conducting a successful assessment. Some of them may seem fairly obvious, but I think that when you sit down as a group to plan what we are going to talk about now, these are some good pieces of advice for you to take with regard to doing this in a proper way. So the second to last one, I think, is something that is what we should all as clubs consider very seriously, which is avoid promising something that you cannot either deliver on or that you haven't made a formal decision on. So even when we get into the community meeting with the community members one-on-one, we don't want to go in there and look like if we have come with a bag of goodies and there to, solve all their problems, or that we have unlimited budget, but I'm sure no Rotary Club has. And in other words, create a situation or create expectations that you're not going to be able to satisfy later on. So community meetings are the first way in which we can do this. In the case of, and I'm going to use the example of what my club did a lot, because it's very recent, and we also learned with respect to whether we follow these guidelines or not, and in some cases we didn't properly, and that caused some problems. So I'm going to share with you, while giving you this presentation, some real life experiences that we had in when we reached out to this community. So the first thing which is advised to be done, and which we did in fact do as well, is to try and have a meeting with the community. Now, it may seem simple to say that, but go out into a rural community, and the first set of questions that may become obvious are, who are the people in the community that I should be speaking to? Not every community or village group necessarily has a community council, but most, naturally speaking, most places like villages do have elders that are considered to be leaders. Some of them have actual structured committees that have a membership that represent the community. And if you were lucky to have that, then you would have taken, you would have, let's say you would have not have the problem of trying to identify who the community leaders are as your first step. You would obviously go directly to the community council members. In our case, for example, there was not a community council. They tried to form one over the years, but I guess they didn't have the wherewithal to come together and actually have an election and do things in a structured way, which happened to turn out to be, by the way, as a tangent, something else that we were able to deliver as a project to them and help them with some structure and help them actually form a proper community council along the way. So that was a side extra good thing that happened from this process that I'm describing. So having recognized who the community leaders were, we then visited them and asked them to have a community meeting and explained to them, obviously, what we were trying to do, and by extension, asked of them to think about the most pressing issues that their community faced. And we even in that first meeting actually talked about what were the obviously pressing issues and what they saw as what their priorities were. One of the mistakes that we make as Rotarians, or as clubs, I should say, is that we sit down in our meetings and we face each other on a very regular basis, and we think we know. We think we know what the community needs, or we imagine we know what the community needs. And you'll be quite surprised when you go out and you have this face-to-face with the community leaders, what you thought was the most pressing thing might turn out to be the second or third or even the fifth priority for them. So this is quite an eye-opening experience with respect to learning from them what they consider their priorities and perhaps changing your plan to addressing those instead of what you thought they would. So in these meetings, a facilitator would lead the discussions on the issues related to the community's strengths and their challenges, etc. All of this I had started touching on a little while ago in terms of that initial meeting of making it clear to the community leaders what you are trying or what we as a club are trying to accomplish in terms of helping them develop as well as hopefully solve some of their immediate problems in the priority that they see. So that is what leads me to talking about the organizing of the meeting. Should you define your objectives and make them very clear? This talks about a facilitator, which really is going to be somebody from your club who is good at communicating with people, I suppose, and getting this off the ground in a way that the community persons as well feel and understand that this is not something, this is not a PR stunt. This is not something that we're coming there to try to use them in any way, form or fashion to try to advertise Rotary, for example. That's not the intention. It's that you need to obviously take this opportunity to also explain to them what Rotary is all about and why we are taking this step of proactively seeking out a community to see how we could help them develop and help them solve their problems. So these are some of the advantages. I probably touched on some of them already, to having community meetings. It gives to the people of the community a say. It's not just about speaking to the council members, because as you delve further into the discussion and people realize that you're serious about what you're trying to do, others would probably come and want to voice their opinion or be given an opportunity to say what their thinking of this matter is from the north side of the village as against what the south side of the village, for example, was thinking. So it can involve a fairly large group of people, and you have to be prepared for dealing with that as well, meaning that by the time we got to our third meeting, actually what actually happened is the first meeting took place with exactly 2 people from the village. And by the time we had the third meeting, I think there were about 25 people there. So what good came out of that was, I think that the message spread after the first and probably the second meetings that this Rotary Club has actually, we genuinely believe that this Rotary Club has come to help us. And we would like to hear they're very open about hearing everybody's opinion. And it would be nice to have a consensus, which is another good thing that comes out of the community meeting and the interaction with people directly. There will come a consensus that those problems that were identified in the initial discussion are in fact representative of what most people in the village think. So that helps to give credence and to give some let's say some encouragement to what happens next with regard to the actions that we intend to take with their help. Some of the challenges, just to touch on very quickly, can be, some people who don't have the experience or the decorum to understand how a meeting is supposed to operate, and they continuously badger you, or they continuously, interrupt the meeting, or they want to shout, or they want to talk only about their personal particular problem rather than, the community view as a whole. So again, you have to exercise some restraint, and we have to know how to handle this, because, people's lives are what you're talking about here. And in this case, I should have mentioned this before, sorry. In the case of this community that we went to, is called Cotton Hill. Cotton Hill's main problem was the community existed on the top of like a ridge, not a huge mountain, but a ridge that was high enough that all of them lived on the side of a hill. So all of their houses were literally built on the side, on each side of this ridge. And 2 of their major issues was our water supply company, our water company in Trinidad has not, up to this day, by the way, has not provided pipe-borne water to that community. And the reason behind it, and it's kind of embarrassing to tell you, but the reason behind it is because they claim that they don't have the budget for the size of the pump that would be required to pump water up to the height of where all these villagers live. So water and access to water is the number one huge issue in this village. And it became the number one project that we addressed as well, among other things, which I will get to in a minute. So, as I said, there were some people who were, being distractive of the meeting because they were only concerned about themselves or whatever. But again, the way that you manage that, and I think that there are people in all our clubs who are able to maintain their calm and try to ensure that the meeting is carried out properly so that, it's fruitful for both parties. So at the meeting, of course, we're trying to identify the goals. As I mentioned before, we want to have it in an accessible location for where all the villagers could make themselves available. We want to have it at a convenient time. You don't want to have it during the middle of the day when people have gone to work or whatever, so that you could get maximum participation. You want to promote the event throughout the community, not just depend on what the elders say that they will do via word of mouth. And we did exactly that for the third meeting, which is why I think we got 25 people in attendance. And then, as I was saying just now, with respect to trying to have some control over the meeting, you can set rules that you expect everybody to follow and to respect, and to take notes of what people say so that it doesn't appear to be fly by night. It doesn't appear to be you're just there to pretend to listen, but by the next meeting you've forgotten what they had spoken about. So all of this to me is a good reflection of the professionalism of Rotarians, or I should say, it's an opportunity for Rotarians to show their professionalism with regard to not just the humdrum things that we normally do, but approach a community of strangers. Actually, in our case, doesn't have to be that way in your case, and put forward, us being a club and an organization that we belong to that wants to do things in a proper manner. Obviously, again, additional tips are be an active listener, take notes of what people have said, etc., so that when they are being discussed later on, it would obviously prove that you have been, obviously taking note of all the things that they would like to speak about. Okay, so the community meeting, I'll go back there for a second. Community meeting, I think everybody has an idea of what I'm speaking about and why it should be approached in the way that it is approached, because obviously from that you would be able to determine how you may want to now prioritize projects that you can afford to do, not afford to do, or may need third-party help with. This is where the asset inventory comes from now, because to jump the gun a bit again, I need to tell you that the water project or trying to provide a good water supply to this community became the #1 priority. And why I'm bringing that up now with regard to asset inventory is because you may or may not realize, and it may not be obvious to you, that when you go to this community, they may have things that you didn't know about before that could contribute to this project in some way. So for example, I'm not sure if it was in the advice beforehand, but in the community meeting, you also want to make it clear that this is not about a handout. This is not like a government intervention where they come down there with free hampers and try to how should I say it, try to make people think that they are cared about by some kind of immediate gesture that doesn't necessarily last long. You need to obviously make it clear that what you intend to do is something that is going to be impactful for them over a long term, and that there's genuine care and concern and planning that you intend to put into this. So when it became obvious that providing water to the community was going to be the #1 priority and the focal point of the project that we were going to do, the next step that we took was to ascertain what kind of assets, which include material, but it could also include resources or skill sets that exist in the community. Meaning that if we're going to talk about a water project, which likely is going to include water collection, water storage, water distribution, and there are people in the community who are expert in, they may be plumbers, for example, or there was one person who worked at the water authority, so he was very useful. And then there were other people who over the years were accumulating pipe, for example, that they were going to use or try to use as a project for themselves, that we realized after the fact became an inventory item that we were able to use together. And when we we're able to take an inventory of all the people who had thought about having pipes or having fittings for piping that they were going to try to do as a project for themselves, it actually turned out that the community collectively had enough pipe to connect them to the closest water pump. So it's very interesting that when we did the asset inventory part, it was determined that even the individual members of the council, and in fact, all of the people in the village didn't realize that when we took an inventory of what they owned collectively, it was actually enough to get this project started. So that was a really interesting, fact that came about because of doing this deep dive in a way that is structured and makes sense, as I hope you would realize by the end of this presentation, to determine the feasibility of this project and what are the resources that the community that you're trying to help actually already have that could be contributing to the success of this project. So I think I touched on some of these already. The advantages are, of course, that they might have resources, etc., that you did not realize before. You might have interested members of the community or experienced members of the community that could obviously form part of this project team, and people who would be able to have some kind of responsibility going forward in terms of maintenance, which is very important for long-term impact. So some of the challenges are pretty obvious. Not everybody might have been so forthcoming with respect to how much pipe they had acquired, for example, or how much they were willing to contribute to the community project. So identifying was a little bit difficult. In some cases, communicating was a little bit difficult, etc. But eventually this community really did come around. And I think that it had a big part to play in that was how we represented ourselves in terms of, again, the professionalism that I think that we showed, and the eagerness I think that they were able to see from us in terms of follow-ups and callbacks and gathering additional information, etc. So suggested questions with respect to how you determine this inventory capacity that they have. It goes into a little bit more information about if it were a larger community, I think is where some of these pieces of advice come from. But in the case of Cotton Hill, I think the entire population was just a few hundred people. So it was a very small community. I touched on already what they know, what do we know, what skills do they have, what do they own. I kind of touched a little bit on all of those things already. Suggested questions with respect to the inventory, with respect to determining what their inventory includes, how do community members demonstrate that they care for trust. So this is it became part of the exercise that we became involved in a little bit more as time went on, because we needed to also engender their trust in us, but at the same time, we needed them to display or to learn how to have some trust in each other as well. And, there's so many things, great things actually that came out of this project that was not humongously expensive at the end of the day, which I will explain in a minute, but so many other things, really good things happened as a result of this, including the fact that that community is a much more close-knit community now than they certainly ever were prior to 3 years ago, I can tell you that. So some of the questions about utilities and services is exactly what I'm talking about, because as I told you, this turned out to be, the main part of this turned out to be a water project. The last question is very interesting because does a governing body help manage services, create and enforce rules? Exactly. The reason for bringing that up is because during the course of assessing whether the water project would be the that other than the water project being the long-term project, what are the other things or potential projects that came out of this, was that they felt that because of how rural they were, and because most of them were pretty low income, and because they didn't have this reliable water supply, one of the things that they think was a problem, which we also addressed, was what are the things that can cause harm to their children with the lack of a good water supply. So one of the things that we actually did before we even started the water project was we did a medical outreach in the village. And I guess many clubs do similar projects, but this medical outreach was interesting from the point of view that the outcome of, or the data that we were able to gather from the types of tests that we were able to perform with our volunteer doctors, dentists, nurses, etc., was that most of the children, especially in the community, had serious dental problems. And we were also able to ascertain that they had a lot of dental problems because of lack of water. So it became a side project, and we were fortunate enough, and as we still have, a really good group of people who volunteer for our medical projects that not just come out on a Sunday and give up their free time for the entire day on the Sunday, but in the case of our dentists, for example, we have two dentists, two dental firms that are firmly committed to two dental practices, I should say, that are firmly committed to not just the assessment on the day, but to either giving service, follow-up dental service to a certain cap for free, or giving some kind of significant discount to those that have more serious problems and would cost more money to do. So again, this is an offshoot of some of the power of our Rotary clubs that I don't think that we exercise enough or we don't develop enough, which is creating partnerships with other service providers that could not only aid the projects that we do, but have some kind of longer-term commitment that they would give to some of the community service projects that we do. In this case, where it was a planned approach, as I said at the beginning, we planned to go to this community and speak with them. We didn't necessarily think that part of what we were going to do was a medical outreach, and we didn't necessarily think that it was going to produce the results that we found, which then turned out to be a secondary and tertiary project, otherwise in terms of their health and their health development. So I think I've spoken enough about inventory to move on from there with regard to what we should ask and what we shouldn't ask. Here comes another interesting development. So you might think that at this point, not only because of how much I've already said, but you might think that at this point, we might have already known or come to know all that there is to know about the community. And we actually didn't. And we found that out very starkly when we decided to do a survey after those steps that I have just explained. And the survey was a very simple questionnaire that had to do with what we had spoken about before, but also for you to express your feelings or your opinions, your suggestions, your recommendations, that did not have to be, that could have been anonymous if you wanted it to be, to I guess, dive a little further or dive a little deeper into the opinions of people that they may or may not have been so eager to express in the public forum. And I mean, how many of us, even in our own Rotary clubs, we all know this, even in our Rotary clubs, if we have a club assembly, or we have a meeting that went a little awry, or if we had some little mini argument or whatever it is, there are certain people who will be very vociferous in the meeting, and there are other people who, they only know when to really express their opinion when the meeting is over. And there's what we call in Trinidad, the after meeting. So the after meeting is a few people that go in the corner and shoo and really say what they feel about what transpired, or they go off, somewhere on their own and express themselves. And that is the kind of information I'm saying that we wanted to try to gather from the people who didn't speak as much at the meetings, or were quiet, or didn't attend the meetings at all. So it allowed us to expand the horizon of truly understanding where this community was at, what they felt, and what they felt we should be doing. How they felt about us, for example, was also one of the questions. So in most of the cases, and that means I think that we did a good job, our president of the day did a very good job as well of really communicating, in her, and I think she played a big role in that. She and others, of course, but she particularly, in being very passionate in the way that she was delivering to them and saying that, if we promise to follow up on Monday, we will be following up on Monday, and then we stick to that sort of thing. So we gained that trust pretty quickly. But the survey still, as I said, it delved a little deeper into people who maybe didn't want to say what they really felt, or didn't mind giving us an anonymous response. So after the survey, we were able to determine that sorry, there are some notes here about what the advantages of the survey are. I think I kind of spoke about that already. And what the survey allowed us to do, as I was about to explain, what the feedback from the survey, these are tips for designing a survey. The feedback from the survey gave us a much clearer idea of what we should be doing next, or how we should be approaching this as a long-term solution. So to explain that now for you in terms of the project that we actually did, what we eventually determined based on feasibility, based on the asset inventory, based on the needs of the community, based on the most accessible places where a water source could be used by those that didn't have or had to travel for miles to get. And what we ended up doing was we did like a huge multiple water tank depots in 3 different parts of the community, in 3 different but accessible parts of the community. So we installed several thousand gallon tank capacity, which we were able to design in such a way that they were protected, but that they were easily accessible as a phase 1. So that wasn't the entirety of the project. I'm just telling you what the phase 1 was. So the phase 1 was, you don't have to travel for miles anymore to get clean, potable water. You only need to travel, depending on which third of the village that you were in, a fairly short distance in order to access water. The second part of the project had to do with how we were going to continue to have those tanks reliably filled. How do we determine what the usage factor by the village was in terms of how quickly will they extract all the water from the tank? In other words, instead of us, again, sitting on our thrones and thinking that we know the answer to the question, or we just decide upon with ourselves, once a month or once every 2 weeks is okay, without actually determining or getting feedback from the community, as in so many people are now accessing this new water facility that it was not being abused, but it was being run down a lot faster than we thought. And so this gave us feedback that made us realize that a different approach needed to be taken with regard to how we were going to refill the water. And so again, a third party had to become involved, and the influence of Rotarians became an asset and a resource in this project as well, whereby we were able to impress on what in Trinidad is called the Regional Health Authority. The Regional Health Authority were the people who we were able to convince that they needed to go to Cotton Hill at least once every 2 weeks to refill all of the tanks, because that was the general period of time when they would be exhausted. And we decided to rubber stamp that further by getting them to agree in writing that they would definitely do this, or else the whole purpose of putting up the water facilities would obviously not have the kind of impact if it is that they were always empty or they always had to beg for water. So the second phase was that which is ensuring that they would always have their new tank supply full and accessible, which became the second, which we have eventually been able to do satisfactorily. And before we get to community mapping, and then the third phase, which we are still working on 3 years later, and I suppose you wouldn't be surprised at this, when I explained earlier on about collectively they had enough pipe to actually run the pipe, blah, blah, blah. The big issue that we faced is the fact that the water company would not allow anybody else besides the water company to lay pipe and connect to their system. I mean, I think you could kind of understand why. Just obviously can't be done by any and everybody or willy-nilly. But what is interesting is we went to the water company and you said, hey, we're not asking you to install a new $1 million pump. We're not asking you for material. We're not even asking you for labor. We're just asking you for supervision, because we have the material. We actually have the labor both in the community as well as volunteer labor. And we want you to supervise the laying of the pipe on both ends of the village to connect to the other smaller pumps on both ends of the village, and eventually be the water source to the community water tanks. That would be now the permanent connection of water, after which we argued to the water company, you could then probably sell in the near future actual paying water connections to the people in the community and create a whole new 500 new customers or whatever it is out of this project. So in the initial stage, it would be a very awesome community service project, but it could have, you know, a good impact on all of us, including you, in terms of creating new customers without the $1 million pump idea that you had to pump water up there, without even knowing if those people were going to be paying customers or not. Now we're talking about installing community water tanks, and all we want is a permanent connection to them so that they're always full. We're still working on that. But that is the longer term solution with regard to the regional health authority not having to truck water up there on a regular basis, and of course providing water to them regularly and properly and reliably, etc., which we're still working on. I'm near the end now, so community mapping is just one of the other techniques, and I think this is something that drills down a little further if it were a larger community that we're talking about. In our case, it was not, so we didn't necessarily have to drill down this far. As a matter of fact, when we got to the point of survey and the feedback from the survey, that was actually good enough for us to decide what we were going to do. So here we are with takeaways now from this presentation. Why is a needs assessment so important? Following Rotary's guidelines, in this case, this is what I used for this presentation, which were Rotary's guidelines. I added, and I hope that it helped, by giving you a real life example of how we use the guidelines and what we faced and what we are yet to accomplish with regard to that project. Ensure the project satisfies the community expectations. I think we certainly did that. And I touched on this just now, the importance of follow-up, very, very important. So that is my presentation. That is the end of the presentation. However, we have a part 2 to this on Thursday, as everybody knows. Maybe I could stop sharing now. Or no, I'll have to continue sharing so that I could, so that you'll be able to record this and or take a photo of this, as the case may be. But what the second part of the exercise is that we would like to discuss on Thursday is case studies with respect to what I just presented. So I know that Leah is going to take charge of who deals with what, but I'm going to show you now 3 different scenarios. And as I said, she will take charge of how this is done with respect to putting you in groups or doing it individually or whatever. But I know that what the intention here to do is to consider hopefully very seriously, each of these case studies as a potential actual event and how you would approach it with the advice that I've given you and with some of the takeaways that you just saw. And hopefully on Thursday, have a nice rousing discussion about how you would do this. So this is case study A. Leah, am I okay so far?
We are actually 5 minutes beyond the end point, but what you can do is just scan through it quickly. The slides will be shared with them, and we will assign them to teams, but we'll ask them to just review all of them depending on which team they get put into.
Sure.
It will
Sure.
be done.
Okay. So that's fine. Right. Great. So everybody understands the point. This is the first case study exercise, which talks about a vacant, a recreational facility and activities needed for teenagers. Could a project come out of this? Is there a potential budget for this? Is this something out of our league? Is this something we could actually look into? The second case study talks about an elderly couple in town. I think I know of a couple of clubs from past discussions with them who've actually done similar projects to this. And it was quite interesting when I had done this same presentation to a group of young people, some of the very, very excellent suggestions that they had within the space of 5 minutes actually about this particular project. How can you help this couple? The last one has to deal with a school and poor students that go to the school and what can be done, what can't be done. For those who know me or know me a little better than others, I could talk about this particular one for the next 2 hours because it's a pet project of mine and of my club. But these are the case study exercises, and these I will now hand back to Leah to explain to you how you will determine, how you will discuss, and how we will deal with what we come back on Thursday to talk about. Thank you very much. I hope that everybody learned something today.
Thank you so much, PDG Roger and PE Roger. I noted your name on the president-elect list. 4th time is the charm. That was an excellent, comprehensive presentation. I am sure you gave everyone a lot to think about. Don't worry, the slides will be shared with you, so you'll have them to refer to. You won't have to try and remember all of that information on your own. For Thursday's session, we will email you with the instructions, letting you know which group you're in and which case study you should be preparing to discuss in the breakout sessions on Thursday. So don't worry about that either. We will send it for you. In case you didn't get to capture it, that's fine. We'll now have some brief announcements and reminders. So I invite Rotaractor Ryan to give us those.
Hi, good night, everyone. So just a few announcements. Thursday session is a discussion and it will be from 6 to 8. And then next Tuesday, we have another training from 6 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. The topic is the Rotary Foundation, District Grants, Small and Simple. Also PEs, you are encouraged to invite your incoming Rotary Foundation chair, and we are also encouraging you to turn on your camera, so that we can take photos, because we take photos, so we are encouraging you to put on your camera. Back to you, Leah.
Okay, thank you for that, Rotaractor Ryan. We are now at the very end, but before we close, we invite DGE Brian to give us some closing remarks.
Sorry, I was muted. Just to wish everyone a good night and thanks for joining this session this evening. There are a few matters that we will need to discuss and get some official positions on, and we will present those on Thursday. So look forward to seeing everyone here on Thursday. Thanks to all the wonderful presenters this evening, including those who are trying to get it right as president and going back and back until they get it right. PDG Roger, thanks for your presentation as well. So, and Leah and team, again, thanks for a wonderful job of coordinating this evening's session. So to all participants, thanks for putting up with us and see you on Thursday.
Good night, everyone. Thank you so much. Bye.